Zelia Kranich, and my day job is working for Merck in sustainable sourcing. And my night job is obviously this one. I also work with PSCI. I co-lead the environment team and was on the board last year. And I've been in the environmental industry for about 30 years now. I should probably stop telling people that because I'm definitely aging myself. I've been working in sustainability for the past 20 years and in sustainable sourcing and working with suppliers for the past 20 years as well. Most of that with Estee Lauder companies and then Pitney Bowes. And so in electronics and cosmetics. And now with Merck, I do a similar function and working with pharma. So really excited to be here and to talk to y'all today about how we can advance this space and have put together a work plan with all of you.
Excellent. Fred.
Awesome. Thanks, Zelia. And first and foremost, just say thank you to Oliver and the team, SPP core team. It very much is a grassroots effort driven by passion. I've only had exposure in the last couple of months, but it feels like a startup company in terms of the frenetic pace, the amount of enthusiasm, and just purpose-driven. So kudos Oliver and team on a really good day. This is my third session I've been in, and they've all been fantastically facilitated and great content. So hopefully we can keep that going. Fred Turco, I lead indirect sourcing for Pfizer. Anything that doesn't touch drug product in our manufacturing facility, my team supports globally. See some colleagues on the line here as well. Thanks to them for showing up and giving support today or heckling. So that includes supply chain, facility site services, energy, and obviously quite a bit in this in the climate action program and capital globally. We support 47 manufacturing facilities, around 15 R&D, and then over 100 commercial facilities within Pfizer. So really happy to be here. Previous life, I've led Pfizer green building efforts, greening our fleet and other kind of EHS into operational functions, and happy to continue that momentum here with this team.
Excellent. Marcus, call your slides up, Fred.
Thank you, sir.
And as I said, feel free to put questions into the chat. You can also use the reactions button. I know pharmaceutical industry doesn't traditionally love Zoom, so apologies for that. I appreciate you guys probably have to broken various rules, I should imagine, to technology rules to listen in, but you're all very welcome. So feel free to put your questions in, your thoughts, your ideas, or heckles for Fred. It really doesn't matter. As I said, I'm sure we'll all be welcome for it. So Fred, over to you.
All right. So the first few slides, Oliver, if you just don't mind advancing, are about, we'll go back to the agenda slide, sorry.
Sure.
As you folks can see, we've practiced this like 5 times. No, I'm joking. So today, what we want to go over, Zelia and I, we want to just talk about the pledge, and Oliver's already covered that off for us, right? Who is SPP, the grassroots effort, and other. I think what really comes across to me is it's for procurement by procurement. So it's effectively procurement-oriented folks translating a lot of great information out there. Sustainability, a really wide area. And SPP helps filter that and translate it to implementable procurement efforts. So I think this is the first effort I've been involved in that's very focused on procurement. I think a lot of the other efforts are fantastic, but they don't speak specifically to the procurement professional. So kudos to SPP for that. Why do we need sustainable procurement in pharma? And Zelia is going to talk about that quite a bit. And then I'll give you a bit at the end of the roadmap. As discussed, two-way dialogue, right? We're in the very early stage of forming the Pharma Chapter of SPP. We've had 2 meetings, but really one core meeting as a team of kind of what do we want to do? What do we want, the value that we bring? How do we translate SPP cross industry to pharma? And then how do we work with the pharma folks in this effort? So we're really very early days. So we're open for comments, thoughts, suggestions, and this is a good way to solicit that. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think we'll go right here. Thank you. Zelia?
Yeah, so SASB, I think you're all familiar with SASB, that basically they're the group that determines materiality and what's important to each type of organization within each industry and what we should be focusing on in the ESG space. And so as you can see, there are a number of things listed here, and this is kind of their typical menu of what they do for materiality assessment, what they look at. And the items that are highlighted are the ones that they've selected that they say, you know what, in your space, this is what you should be focused on. And so you might be surprised to see under environment, greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, things that are really important to us are not necessarily highlighted there. And they're highlighted instead under business model and innovation because they're under supply chain. And so SASB is saying that supply chain is really where the majority of our impact is in the ESG space. And so for us as procurement professionals, it's extremely important that we're focusing on this and leading the charge because it's primarily around our suppliers. And that can be seen in, if you look at the next slide, most of our greenhouse gas actually comes from our suppliers. Greater than 80% of most of pharma's emissions comes from scope 3. And so I think it works out to be something like 11.4 times the amount of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from our suppliers, our scope 3 emissions. And so that's where we need to focus, right, on our suppliers. Our scope 1 and 2, you can see on these graphs here, very small compared to that light green color, which is the scope 3 upstream piece. So we've done a lot in the past year. Pharma has really stepped up. We're seeing a lot more pharmaceuticals in the SBTI space and the science-based target space. We're seeing where they're working with the science-based targets, they're committing to science-based targets and committing to the 1.5 degree mark. So there's 51 pharmas that are currently taking action, 32 pharma that have science-based targets to date, and 24 with commitments to 1.5 degrees, the stronger commitment. And if you looked at this just a couple of years ago, these numbers were about 90% less from where they are today. So we are really moving in this space, we're really stepping up, and we're looking for our suppliers to do the same. And overall, SBTI, 2,601 companies taking action at this point, 1,213 with science-based targets. It's incredible how much this has really taken flight and how many companies are signing on to science-based targets at this point. So when you look at all the different things that we can work on and why do we care? So why are we all looking at this? For pharma, we're saving lives. Why should we look at sustainability at all? Why should we care about environmental or social? And it's really about living to our promise, right? To protect human health, to protect the environment. It all goes together. And so how can we save lives at the end, but cause environmental pollution or not be environmental stewards in the beginning? You can't be a company that works on curing cancer when in fact you're a company that's not worrying about the environment and worrying about the chemicals and what we might be doing to the environment. And so there is a very large risk for us reputationally. We're seen as the companies that cure, the companies that are there for human health. And so things like our greenhouse gas emissions, when we get something that says we emit more greenhouse gas in the automotive industry because of our supply chain, we need to make sure that we're addressing things like that. With our ingredient sourcing, this could have huge ramifications. Imagine we lose the biodiversity that we have today, and we lose our future ingredients, or we can't even continue making the drugs that we make today because they're no longer available, or they become ridiculously expensive because we can't source them anymore. Or imagine that within our sourcing policies or within the way that we source, that we're actually hurting people in the beginning, or we're not sourcing them properly, or we don't understand where our things are sourced from, so they're not of the quality that we would hope for, or that there's child labor involved, or any kind of slave labor involved. And we've seen some examples of this, across industries, where the whole thing with COVID-19 has created quite a demand on things like gloves and masks. So the PPE, a lot of slave labor has been utilized in order to get us there, because these were emergency situations where the normal lines of supply chains didn't work. And so we had to get things however we could. When you look at something like logistics and human rights, there's often an eBay style of managing that, where they're contractors of contractors. And so the further down the supply chain you go, the less you know about those suppliers. And so it's really important that we're managing that risk, that we understand if we have a risk, and that we're looking at it from a risk lens overall. So beyond risk, there's lots of opportunities for us, right? It's not all about managing risk. So having our suppliers utilize sustainable aviation fuel. So where we need to have those flights, where we need to send things using planes, let's do that in a sustainable way wherever possible. For those of you that have been going throughout this day and attending the different sessions, you heard a lot about sustainable packaging this morning. And so a million opportunities there around using alternative materials, making things more recyclable, looking at how we generate our packaging differently, and even things like reusable shippers. And of course, things like the Energize program or having our suppliers source renewable energy. Then there's opportunities that are on the horizon. So opportunities that we haven't even seen yet within pharma, but they're out there. And these are innovations that we can begin to work on, innovations that we can continue to look at, and things that we should be striving for. And a lot of our suppliers are there already. They're starting these, they have them in smaller scale, but these are things that we can really moving in the future, and to become better and to be front runners in this. So things like having certified raw materials. Some of the raw materials we utilize have great certifications already. Some of them we really understand the sourcing of them. Other ones, they don't have those certifications yet, and so we could work on that more. We can work on getting our ingredients certified. Blockchain technology, looking at chemical recycling. These are all things that are starting to happen across industries, and definitely things that we should be looking at as well within pharma.
So thanks, Zelia. I paused because I didn't know if this was me or you. But again, those 5 times, the 6 times the charm. So with great power comes great responsibility. Obviously, pharma is an industry built on patience. And procurement were an enabling function to that industry. The benefit of procurement is a leverage play, right? We have the opportunity to kind of work with our internal folks and help promote sustainability, but also work with suppliers, right? Really learn from them as we go forward in collaboration, and put this on the table as a consideration for differentiation as we go forward, right, with that. And I think procurement is uniquely placed in order to do that. Next slide, please. So a bit of our roadmap. So let me start with the right. Sustainability is a massive space for many of you that are already participating, for those that are looking to get into, leveraging your procurement background and the sustainability space. It can be overwhelming at times, the amount of information, and then almost needs to be taken in tranches of, to Zelia's point before, is it risk mitigation up front, reputational, right, or other? And what's your program? What are the higher risk areas? What's your program to mitigate some of the labor law, modern slavery, and some other factors that may be risk to your business going forward that are much bigger than the dollars? It's more reputational, especially for a pharmaceutical patient-centric organization. Or is it more the voluntary programs, environmental commitment and reduction, right? Climate action or others, which is reputational as well, but it's more of a voluntary, what you commit to that you think is right for the environment. And I think I heard it said really well earlier today. It's the 3 Ps, right? It's the people, planet, and prosperity, or profit, right? That helps drive kind of some of this orientation, right? From a social, environmental, and then some governance for that. So as a chapter, we want to take one step back and say, okay, rather than diving in and saying, here's what we think is wrong, right? Or the opportunity is, we want to understand from you, and then what's out there already available, what the opportunity is, because it's a massive space. So rather than just diving in. So, and we see ourselves as a core team for SPP Pharma as subject matter experts, practitioners, right, in the space for some time with varying backgrounds that can work with things like, organizations like PSCI, larger SPP, and then, there's a screenshot to the right there, you name it, right, in this space in terms of organization. PEG is another pharmaceutical group. There's many folks in this that are very focused on specific areas. How do we help kind of digest that down into one of procurement orientation, right, the audience, and then two, pharma, and help folks kind of uniformly move their program forward. So we see that as a core function of our team. Our initial plan is to take a step back Q1, Q2. We're in the storming phase of our team development. And ultimately, we think that will pay dividends into better performing, because when we do put some effort behind, right, and we do some of this filtering and get out to the chapter for engagement, there'll be some product that we think is more consumable going forward. We will do some initial prioritization because, again, it's a massive space, what we think is most relevant to pharma kind of across, right, and we think is most available. So most relevant, most available, and easy to kind of turn into solutions for pharma folks. Q2, we'll start that sharing of references and others, right? We'll use the SPP kind of engine, if you will, right? In terms of the get it out there kind of focus, and we'll start that sharing process. And then Q3, we'll look to develop a more scrutiny of a reference document we think can help almost a maturity model. People progress their own maturity wherever they are, so they can do that initial assessment of where they think they are in developing a sustainable procurement practice, and then kind of pick up the references that help promote them along the way, and that will carry right into Q4. Zelia, anything to add? Anything I missed?
No, I think you covered it really well. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much that we can do in this space, so many opportunities, and to be able to really focus and be able to determine our future roadmap and what we want to look at is really important. And I think it's going to be a little bit different for each one of our companies as to what we want to implement, but to have that kind of overarching, those great ideas, and to have to all move in a similar direction would be a great place to be.
So with that, I think it leads us into our last slide. Thank you, Zelia. Ta-da! Sorry, no high graphics. But I think this is the Q&A session, right? So again, we've met once as a core team. SPP started in, Oliver did a good job, 2019, really got its legs underneath them, 2020 into 2021 as a pharma chapter. Initial kind of putting together the co-lead, Zelia and I, end of last year into early this year. So we're early days, right? Bad news is we're early days. Good news is opportunity to influence, right, how we work as a team for you, the pharma procurement folks, SPP ambassadors out there. So questions, comments, concerns, and Oliver, I'll leave it to you to facilitate. You do such a good job.
Yeah, no, sure. And may I start first, if I can? And it gives everyone to have a little chance to think about what they want to ask you. And as I said, do put your hand up, guys, or put some thoughts in the chat. And as I said, you may be sitting there thinking, what on earth is all this? Or you might be sitting there thinking, this is great, how can I get involved? Or anywhere in between. It's totally fine. I want to hear from it. So one thing I thought was really impressive to hear from you, and I again, my day job is to work with collaborations in the industry, is the fact that you're going to filter first. So there is already the PSCI, obviously, Zelia, you know that well. There's PEG. There's actually, as I said, a million initiatives, a million logos, a million things going on at the moment that actually, I think just arguably there's too much, and it feels like you've realized that, and there's a need to kind of filter it, all the noise, and join it up perhaps a little bit, but also translate it for procurement, because it feels like it's a lot of sustainability professionals talking about what procurement's going to do rather than involving procurement in what's going to do. I'm being a little bit facetious, but would that be fair? So I just wanted to reflect on that, and Zelia, particularly your experience with the PSCI, how important is that going to be, and what do you think are the key things that you're going to have to do in that kind of first phase?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge difference between PSCI and this organization here, one of which is the PSCI, everything ties back to audits, ties back to official trainings. You know, here we're able to really brainstorm and learn from each other and just share ideas and work together and aim for the moon, you know, just not even worry about, is it doable? Is it something we can put out to our suppliers? And so I see this as being a forum where we can look at all different ideas and have sessions like this that are maybe not quite as polished and maybe not something we would send out to each one of our suppliers, but a way for us as procurement professionals to all come together and really look at what we can do and what works for procurement. Because, you know, it's great for somebody who has a sustainability background to come in and say, oh, we can have great sustainable packaging and no problem, let's do this tomorrow. But we as procurement understand all the different stakeholders that are involved with that, the timelines for getting those kinds of things approved, and how difficult that might be in our space. So to make things specialized for procurement and to be able to have that kind of dialogue and understand what procurement professionals have to do on a day-to-day basis and how this can fit in a practical, doable, reasonable kind of way, I think is something that's long, long overdue. And clearly it is by the number of people that have joined in to this, just using LinkedIn, over 6,000 members in 1 year, so or a couple of years. So that's my thoughts. Right? I'm sure you have a lot to add to that in general, but.
Good. Well, let's get straight into Roberto. Thanks for putting your hand up first. What do you want to share?
Well, I work with PAHO, Pan American Health Organization. We are the regional office of the World Health Organization. We're still under the emergency, but we have to start looking at how we're going to achieve goals for 2030. And one of the difficult questions that we have is, we're going to work with the industry, and we're going to find a lot of reaction, and we're not going to be able to work with them. And here, what we're being told is, no, it's actually backwards. Industry is doing something about it. So it's welcome news to see how we purchase vaccines from Pfizer and we purchase treatments, how we can work together. So I look forward on behalf of my organization to work with the industry on this behalf.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto. And I think what we're trying to say to our supply chain, and as Zelia said, it's 80%. So it's, +5 to 1 ratio there in terms of, if you would just look at climate action, but more broadly sustainability. Pharmaceuticals is a largely outsourced business, right? We have our core operations, and we're very dependent upon our supply chain for our operations going forward. So we're taking this as a collaboration. We're not doing it to suppliers. We want to do it with on the Pfizer side. And that's what I think you'll see out of the SPP, because that's been the tone today for all the discussions, not just pharma, but all the industry, and then the focus that this is a common problem. Therefore, it's got to be a common solution, right? When we look at these things, right, that collectively, and it's not just independent parts. If Pfizer's a large company, but our suppliers are oftentimes larger, it has to be a collective share, right, in going forward in solutioning. So yeah, thank you for the comment, and we look forward to continued collaboration.
Yeah, and the best collaborations are value chain collaborations, instead of there being one tier that moans about those above and below, basically. So I think the more that this as an initiative can make sure we hear from the voices of your customers and the people who are buying the vaccines and are buying their treatments, and those that are involved in the supply chain who do get sent lots of surveys and do get sent lots of data requests and do get sent lots of sometimes silly requests and things like that. It's important that, I think it feels like it's important that this chapter should involve perspectives continuously from all sides, so you don't create your own little echo chamber of what you think is great. It sounds like it's going to be quite important. Patrick, thanks for putting your hand up. What do you want to share?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I like the approach, and also thanks for the advocacy, because, if I think about it from the pharmaceutical industry's perspective, moving from denial to somewhat of the, I call it acknowledgement to advocacy, it takes a bit of time. We're in a highly regulated industry. We tend to think, we do our auditing and our management on our tier 1 suppliers, so the world is good. And in reality, something that I would encourage that we advocate more of is experience. So when you actually physically can share those case studies, or even the go-sees for all of these aspects that actually take place in our highly regulated industry, especially very upstream in our supply chains, it's a great opportunity to actually educate all of our decision makers, whether in the let's say regulators as well as within our own companies, to build that advocacy. So really look forward to being a part of this, and also appreciate the efforts that are ongoing. One question I have is, from experiences, how do we share those best practices, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, where we have our own experiences and those that we don't want to share because it may affect how we're perceived, in the markets. So how do we deal with that? Because we're all on a bigger purpose, as we described here.
It's a very
I think you're giving us a plug there, Patrick.
Yeah.
I see this group as being the perfect way of doing that, getting the word out, and having, what are you aiming for, Oliver? 1 million people involved, right? So I think this is one way that we can get the word out, and certainly, other groups similar to this, and by word of mouth, and by working with our suppliers on a regular basis. In pharma, we have very large supply chains. I mean, at Merck, I think we have hundreds of thousands of suppliers. And so it's not a quick process, but it's something that we keep working on. And if we get the word out there, things just snowball over time. You'd be amazed at how you work on one packaging initiative, and then others are doing it, and then others are doing it, and it becomes the norm. And you didn't even realize it happened until you look back and you say, you know what? Wow, 3 years ago, we didn't even use recycled content. Now it's the norm. It's, if you can look at distribution packaging, now it's the norm that it's 90% recycled content, right? But I remember working on those initiatives earlier in my career, and where that was a huge deal to get recycled content in your distribution packaging. So yeah, I think this is a great forum to do that, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and if I could just build on that, I think this is a non-competitive space, right? Recognized as non-competitive. I think as long as we're careful in terms of the references, right? We could take some of that. I think sharing is easier in this space because I think we want to promote the leapfrog effect, right? And Patrick, I'm hoping in future to get some of your good examples that I can swipe with integrity, right? And likewise, we'll share some of the things from Pfizer, and Zelia has a lot of great examples. As long as we're not too picky, right? That it's a good practice that maybe you adopt for yours, maybe you just take a piece of it, right? I think this is about sharing, collaborating, doing, right? Learning. We have a supplier engagement program for climate action. It is not perfect. It is not. But it's good, and we're learning through that process, right? The key is that we're doing, right? And our suppliers, to be quite candid, are helping us calibrate, right? On the Pfizer side with their input, because they're pretty advanced and they see some good practices from other folks that they're working with. So I see this as that kind of easy to share format, right? That's a value we can create, and then it's the leapfrog effect. Right? How do we help funnel that down so it's good value add information for folks?
No, thanks for sharing. And also, again, we have good experiences with Together for Sustainability. We have, those collaborative approaches with the markets. And I think the more that we can make those transparent in that collaborative space, as you both described, that's how we move the needle. And I always share within my own leadership communities, it's great to talk at the meta level, but it only becomes reality when we can operate at the shop floor. And it's cool to see what you both are describing. And this is definitely what we can collectively work towards. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's great. A reflection for me, because I work with a number of different industry collaborations, TFS and AIM Progress in Consumer Goods and so on. And I don't mean to be provocative when I say this, but I've dealt with a lot of pharmaceutical companies in the last couple of years, especially, and PSCI and others. And I think it feels like sometimes in pharmaceuticals, there's a feeling, oh, we're pharma. It can't work in pharma. It doesn't work in pharma. You don't understand our industry. It's not like that. It's special, and this is different, and that's different. Yes, there's a lot of special, and there's a lot of different in every industry. But it's interesting how I think sometimes those barriers go up about we can't do this in pharma, when actually you can. So I think, yes, you've got to abide by the rules, of course, and there are rules in place to be able to do that. But there's actually a lot more sharing that can take place. And again, perhaps some of those mechanisms to be able to share can be learned from other industries. And I think that's a critical part of that. So I think there is a lot more that can be done. There's also a lot of getting on and doing it that needs to happen. I think there's been a lot of, not just in the pharmaceutical industry, in PSCI and other groups, there's a lot been of talking, a lot of discussing, a lot of politics and conversations and so on. But actually, there's some really good doing. The Energize program is a great example of people just getting on and do it. Right, let's talk to our suppliers. So I think it can be done when you've got the right people around the table. And procurement gets stuff done, famously. That's what you do. So if there's ever a group that could get stuff done, I think it's you guys. Pav, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Oliver. I completely resonate with you in terms of talking about stakeholders being a bit resistant, sharing information, the nuances that pharma has and medical devices, life sciences as a whole. I guess my question is, from Fred and Zelia to you, is how have you overcome internal challenges with stakeholders trying to bring sustainability to the forefront of the conversation? So in my previous experience, I'm thinking about things like clinical trials, trying to move towards using e-solutions in elements of clinical trials. So it's just trying to say, how have you successfully managed to incorporate suppliers and get them to change the thinking internally as well?
Want me to go first, Zelia? You want to go first?
Sure, you can go first, Fred. Go ahead.
All right. So our program, and I see some the architects, Lizdra is shown, she's our sustainability lead here. For us, you know, first of all, I think benchmarking is great, but then you got to look at your own culture of what fits, right? And then do your own opportunity assessment of where to move the needle, right? Because I think it's such a massive area, you could boil the ocean. So that'd be my first recommendation, of really prioritize what matters and makes sense for you folks, right? Relative to your role and how you face. For us, we didn't want to differentiate our supply base. Obviously, direct is a little different impact than indirect overall. And then we do a lot of outsourcing with clinical trials and others. But what we're trying to do is just focus initially on climate action, right? Within climate action, are you managing, you supplier, A, Y, Z, or Z for my British friends, are you managing your scope 1, scope 2, right? Because if you manage your scope 1, scope 2, we're successful in our program of managing scope 3, right? And what are you doing really well, and how do we leverage that across the space? Initially, maybe that's differentiated in an RFP, right? And then contracting, and then our SRM program. But we're not differentiating. So each supplier has a little bit of their own narrative, right? And initially, our baseline, I'll just share it publicly, is we think 10% of our suppliers, like Zelia, we have a large base, have SBTI. That's kind of penultimate target approved, right? And we have many more in the pipeline. Ultimately, we need 64%. That's our commitment, right, for our scope 3. So we got to really move the needle, right, in terms of that influence. So we're not being picky on the quick wins, right? Let's get them quick wins. If there's resistance there, I'm moving on, right? We're not going to push rope with those suppliers, right? And because there's many suppliers that are already pulling the rope. Here's how we differentiate. Here's what we're doing. Here's the good stuff that we're doing in the space. So my recommendation would be focus on the ones that are doing it well and give them the opportunity to showcase them. Say, look, these are folks that when you talk to your internal customer, you say, they're doing it well, right? And overall criteria, let's say that's 10% of criteria, whatever that is, then you could just showcase them and put a little bit of pressure on the one maybe not doing it as well, not pulling the rope. So instead of the stick, I would use the carrot initially. Ultimately, I think we'll get to the stick in 24, 25 for us. But Zelia?
Yes, I think what's really important is that your sustainability program is part of the DNA of your company. and basically is part of your company's soul. So you don't want to have a sustainability program that doesn't fit who you are as an organization. And I have to say, my proudest moment was we had a 90-minute stockholder session where we talked all about ESG. And at the end, we showed a Merck saying that was from 80, 90, 100 years ago, basically saying that if you treat people the right way, the profits will follow. And it's funny because I spent like 3 years trying to change that saying into a sustainability mission statement until I realized it's perfect just the way it is. So, you know, you want to have it be part of your company's DNA and match that DNA. But I do want to give a special thanks to our sustainability manager, Jack Gavin. I mean, he's done an unbelievable job of really getting it front and center, meeting with the senior leaders, having goals that everybody can understand and that we're all moving in the same direction towards those goals, but then also working on some of those, you know, projects that are just starting out and making sure to encourage those. And we also have a green supplier program where we worked with our suppliers and with our management and with procurement individuals and the category leads and our stakeholders in order to figure out what are we really looking for, not to stifle what our suppliers would tell us, but instead to get those suppliers that are really ahead of the game and that they have some really strong programs and some really great ideas. How do we really partner with them and make it known that these are the suppliers that can go the distance with us and that we can really learn from, and give them a little bit of an added benefit that they're a green supplier and that they're someone that we look towards and that we consider our strong green suppliers. And that way, through that program, through that supplier engagement program, we have learned so much from our suppliers. And I have to say, what they're able to do is quite unbelievable and shocking. Because there are things that I thought, even myself, there's no way we can have a film that's recyclable on our pharmaceutical packaging. But I have suppliers right now that are showing me these great materials that we're able to use. So I'm talking a lot, so I'll stop now. I could keep going on and on forever and ever.
We have loads of questions, and genuinely, and this is genuine, I'm having to sift through the private messages asking how to join the chapter to get to these questions. So the answer to how to join the chapter is get in touch with these two or go to spp.earth, obviously. And as I said, you can be part of helping to build this and develop this. It's great. Sarah, thank you for letting me know who you are. I think you had your hand up. Do you want to make a comment or did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just really inspiring what you guys are doing. I'm our global lead for waste, so not a procurement professional, but definitely was interested in hearing more. Just more of a thought on where I think there could be a lot of value in the work that you guys are doing also is kind of joining in on the circular economy. Like there are some things that kind of on a site-by-site basis have been happening within our network, things like those big blue 55-gallon drums. If there's somewhere down the road where we could just return those to get refilled, those types of things. So love to hear all the great work. Just wanted to throw out another idea.
Very good point. Very good point. So you're from AstraZeneca, of course, who has already a brilliant team as well around you that's doing some great work, and a very good point about the circular economy. Guys, thoughts on that quickly? Let's do it.
Love the idea of reusable shippers and working with suppliers to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible. I mean, like I said, there's so many different opportunities that we can move on, and looking at things like that. If you can not have the waste ever at all and have a reuse, I mean, that's the typical waste triangle, right? And, reuse, reduce, recycle. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Of course, I would say it wrong, right?
You did fantastic.
It's a really tough one.
I will say, I think necessity is the mother of all invention, right? For our COVID vaccine shipper, we needed a full cycle circular process because there's a limitation on products, right? It was an IP, right? But doesn't mean that we can't do that for other shippers, right? Within our processes. It wasn't the cost of the shipper, it was the fact that we couldn't make more of them easily, right? And so we had to do this whole cycling, and it was a key part of our distribution process, massive challenge. But there's ways to do it when you need to, right? We know there's ways to do it, depending upon the business needs. So then we got to put the environmental criteria into doing this, right, being a key driver. So great point.
We are running out of time. We've got more questions we're going to handle. So we're going to go into quick fire mode. Okay, promise? Okay, good. Nancy from Biogen, if I remember rightly, you're very engaged. If you're there, if not, I can ask it for you. What about cross-functional engagement? So how does pharma engage cross-functions beyond procurement?
So Zelia, if you want, I'll go first. I think it's critical, and I see actually here. So our governance within Pfizer is cross-functional, right? And I think that's the only way it can be. So we have corporate affairs that helps drive that in terms of our facing. We're big S, right, in the ESG world, as we should be. Patient access is part of our kind of purpose statement. But as a cross-functional, then environmental health and safety, which are shown on the line here. Finance, which we want to pull in more. We just have a green bond within Treasury. And other kind of financial, that's key to our kind of internal glide path reduction and climate action and other. And then you can kind of just go down the list, right? And ultimately, I think what we need to do more cross-functional within our organization is champions, right? We got to make it easy for our business leaders to champion these efforts. It's a complex topic. How do we make it bite-sized for them to champion more? And that's something, you know, Liz and others will talk about more within our organization. But I think cross-functional is the only way that will be successful. But procurement has a role, right? We have a very clear role to implement and execute. That's where I think the rubber meets the road quite a bit in terms of our supply chain, right? But before you do that from a business case, kind of driver of change, you need a cross-function internally.
Okay.
Excellent. Nancy, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think it's important, especially because on the context, as somehow we discuss internally, yes, one thing is what you do on the background, but actually the people who will live with the consequences of the decision is the team who has to operate this. And if you're not aligned with this, it's basically a bit harder to go through this one. So yeah, no, thank you.
And just to add real quick, because I know it's a quick fire, it's not any different than anything else, right? Than quality, than risk. And we have to work cross-functionally in anything we do as procurement. So this isn't different, and we shouldn't look to make it different. The minute you make it different is when you'll fail.
Yeah, but you know, the reason why I asked this because of course, it's somehow the hype right now. You say it very nice, Zelia. Probably 3 years ago, you start having an initiative. Now it's the topic in every single table. I personally, I'm not a procurement person right now. I was in my past. I'm in another function right now. And probably this is what helps me to really make these connections to understand it's a mindset. And you have to go and say, guys, but this is the reason. It's not only for a good deed, but actually for something that is beneficial to understand. But sometimes it could be, and I'm not speaking on my current role, I'm speaking from the previous one because I had the chance to interact in both sessions, in both sectors. It takes a while, but I think it's also important to make sure to get the support from top to bottom, because otherwise it's even more difficult, isn't it? Otherwise, just aspirational.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Great question from Patricia. How can we practically help with the roadmap? So what do we need to do to help you? What do you want from us now? So I'm sure you can answer that relatively well.
I think the quick answer is prioritization. What matters to you? That's our first, because we're taking a step back. So what are the key topics for you? What are some of the pain areas, pinch points, challenges, and ultimately opportunities you see? Zelia, your thoughts?
I was going to say, Oliver, I think we need one of your calls that has the buttons where people can say this is what's important to them. And
well, I've worked out the fancy survey function on Zoom now after 20 hours of doing it. So yes, we can do whatever you want. Yeah, no worries at all. But I'm sure you will run a survey. You mentioned that actually as a Q3 thing. I think that may even happen earlier, I guess, if there was enough interest. But certainly, I think that's a key part of it, is understanding what's already out there and you guys making sure you fill the gaps where it isn't, I think is going to be pretty key to that. A very good point from Tina. Pharmaceutical industry is highly regulated. How do you think that this is going to be a barrier or a driver for transforming sustainable procurement, driving sustainable procurement? Which sustainable initiatives do you see as being possible to implement without harming either product quality and working within the regulations?
Go ahead, Zelia.
I'm going to take that, Fred. Yeah,
please,
so I think at this point, we're the regulations are starting to come around with this for us as well, where we were really, we didn't see a lot of packaging regulation. We're seeing more and more of it. Even in the human rights and labor space, we're seeing a lot of regulation. The energy space, we're seeing a lot of regulation. So I always say sustainability is what keeps you ahead of regulation, but at this point, the regulations are starting to catch up, and that's not going to stop. It's only going to snowball. So we need to get on this.
Yeah, I agree. I think transparency is becoming more and more, or the need for transparency is becoming greater and greater. SEC just announced today looking to maybe make disclosures on some of the environmental commitments more binding, right? Similar to some of the financial disclosures. And I think that's a good thing, right? Overall, I think it helps us relative to driving change within the organization. And then kind of more industry-wide, I don't think the regulatory timeframe is that big of a barrier. I think it just requires more planning. It's a factor, not a barrier.
Yeah, very good point. Christina asked a very interesting question, and Zelia in particular, given that you spent a lot of time with Estee Lauder and other companies where I think me and you have had some conversations about how certain industries compare against each other, and how that presents. I mean, my own personal reflection on pharma is you're both ahead and behind. You can be very, very slow on some issues, and again, that's often related to some of the sort of typical challenges you find in pharma and regulation and obviously concerns about competitive nature. But in other areas, you're motoring ahead and you're making great progress. So again, the Energize program is a good example where suddenly the consumer goods industry, the chemicals industry, hey, we're going to do a program on engaging our suppliers on renewables now. Well, we've already done it with pharma. So I think it is a bit of kind of slow and fast. I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, I agree with that. I think as far as Energize and even our goals, we're way ahead. You know, where we are with SBTI, we're way ahead. In other things, I think where it's maybe a culture shift internally, those things that are more internally focused are a little bit harder for us maybe at times. We're large organizations for the most part. We have a lot of, you know, in some cases, things are a little bit siloed. So yeah, I see that we're maybe behind with some of the other kinds of initiatives. There's a lot of opportunity. But what I've seen at pharma is when we want to do something, we do it better than anyone else does. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yep. I want pharma to be the best chapter of the SPP. That is the challenge to be set. You've already beaten travel and hospitality in the attendance. And fashion, I don't know how fashion did, but if pharma's got to be better than fashion, surely. The man wearing this shirt, I mean, I'm sure that we can beat fashion. I'm very conscious of time, but again, Nancy, you've asked a good question there about clauses on the MSAs with suppliers, and I don't know if you caught the Chancery Lane stuff earlier in Scope 3, and so there are some of these tools out there in terms of clauses and contracts. Fred, and Zelia, any quick thoughts on the use of MSAs and clauses?
Yeah, again, I think we're in the carrot mode, not the stick. We've enhanced our MSA template to include a clause is not binding, and I'm happy to share language, not proprietary, right, in terms of our environmental section. What that means is if we have an MSA, it's a huge amount of investment, right, with us and that supplier. Just, you know, our MSAs are 150-page documents from a template standpoint. So that means it's a significant relationship, tier 1, tier 2. So not only contractually, we're going to improve that going forward to have some teeth in the MSA, but really it's the SRM program that will drive that change, is the supplier relationship. So not all MSAs are tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, but majority of them are for us. And that's certainly our focus on the SRM program to drive improvement year over year. Zelia?
Yeah, I have to say I'm a huge fan of a code of conduct or having standards, because I find that they're easier to change. Because as you can see, this space moves very quickly and contracts don't always move quickly. So not that I'm against contract language at all, where it can be done and where it makes sense, but I don't think that's something for every supplier or something for every kind of relationship. But having a code of conduct that you can move it quickly and get some new ideas in there and have it aligned to something like the PSCI principles, I think is a no-brainer and a really good way to go.
Awesome. I think that's it, guys. I think this is genuinely, not because it's the last one. I'm very happy about the fact that it's the last one of 13 hours. This has been amazing, genuinely amazing. I know Fred well from the last year of working with some of the initiatives you've been part of. Zelia, I've known you probably even longer. Two great people to be part of this who really get this and understand and got experience. So guys that are listening in and others that have participated, you're in very good hands. Give these guys a hand, make sure that you help shape this. Make sure that there's no duplication of effort. There's no point reinventing the wheel. It's out there. Let's find it. Let's draw it together. But let's translate it for procurement. Let's make procurement lead this. Instead of it happening to you, let's take ownership and make sure you're driving it. Awesome. Well done, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Oliver.
Yeah.
Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks, folks. Really appreciate it.
Get in touch with me.
Look forward to working with all of you.
And folks, LinkedIn is probably the best way of getting. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Probably the best way of getting a hold of me. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.